Good evening, everyone.
Yeah. If you see anyone banging,
No, I'll just pop my head in. Hi, everyone. Oh, we need some volume. Of course, that's the other. It's the right angle to do that from either. Oh, where did it go? Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. Can you wave if you can hear me? Just so I can work that out. Or put your finger up. I'm not hearing any of that. I do think I'm unmuted. And yes, thank you, Conrad. That's very good. I'm assuming Jess and Widgie that you can hear us too. Yes, Jess, wonderful. Thank you. All right, let's set us into the right spot. So, thank you everyone for coming this evening. I'm not going to be in the screen. I'm just going to be sitting at the side because you've already seen my face. And for those here, you've already seen me too. I'm Chris Franks. I'm the chair of Women in Aid Development, and I'm delighted to welcome you here tonight and to welcome people online, Widgie, Jess and Conrad. And we are likely to have some more people joining us online too. We may have another couple of people coming. So I'd like to start, as we traditionally do in Australia, to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait people who may be here today. We're on the land tonight of the Turrbal and the Jagera peoples, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So I want to welcome everyone and our speakers, who I'll introduce in just a moment, to this event. And it's a topic that is of great interest to many people and is one that was recommended by people who've been to our previous events. So thank you for coming along tonight. Agriculture is the main source of income for several hundred million people around the world who struggle with poverty and hunger, most of whom are connected to small-scale or smallholder farms, which collectively supply most food in developing countries. Agricultural development is a powerful tool to end extreme poverty, boost prosperity, and feed about 10 billion people by 2050. Growth in this sector is far more effective in raising incomes among the poorest compared to other sectors, and is crucial to economic growth. Hello, welcome. Grab a seat. But we have risks due to shocks from COVID-19 that we've had, extreme disruptions because of weather, pests, conflicts, especially following the Russia conflict, poor diets, food insecurity. And I think that one of the things that's impressed me most in putting this topic together has been the incredible diversity of people who are actually working in this sector. Everybody is working in a completely different way, but everybody together is working to make a change to that. So I'm going to welcome our speakers. They're going to talk to us for a little while and talk about their work, talk about themselves and how they actually found themselves in the role that they're in today. Because one of the things that we're interested in at Women in Development is also how does your career progress? What are the challenges that you meet? What are the issues that you have to work through? And the best way we know for those things to be worked through is actually by networking, by meeting people, by getting to know someone who's been there and who can give you a bit of advice. So now I didn't check who'd like to start first, but I will. I think everybody saw the dual pointing fingers there. But I'll pick.
Christy is driving me home, so I better listen to it.
Okay, well, let's start in that case with Dr. Risti Plamani.
Can we put Yasmina first?
Oh, okay. We're quickly skipping to Professor Yasmina Sultan-Bawa. Is that how I should say it?
Yes,
Yes,
perfect.
thank you. So Yasmina's research is focused within the agribusiness development framework, specifically in the area of food processing, preservation, food safety and nutrition. And her current research includes the minimisation of post-harvest losses through value addition and the search for natural preservatives to replace current synthetic chemicals. Her research also includes the challenge of nutrition security, in particular micronutrient deficiency or hidden hunger, lack of diet diversity, nutritional losses in the food supply chain, addressed by her work with underutilised Australian plant species and potential new crops. She works also on Australian native plant foods, incorporating them into mainstream agriculture and diet diversification. And the creation of employment, economic and social benefits to those remote communities is an anticipated outcomes. And I'm going to let Yasmina tell us a little bit more about her work and how she got to be doing what she's doing in this area.
Thank you very much, Chris, for the kind introduction. I too would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, Brisbane, Mianjin, the Turrbal and Yagara people. Working in this area, I'm very grateful for the 65,000 years of knowledge that they hold and for being resilient in keeping that knowledge and for the generosity they have shown in sharing it with us, which is helping us immensely in really understanding climate change and how we manage our lands now. So a little bit about me, Chris. I'll just talk about my journey a little bit because we've got quite a few young people in the audience. So I'm originally from Sri Lanka and I migrated to Australia in 2007. So I did chemistry as my first degree. I just fell in love with chemistry and what it offered to me. But I wanted to do something in applying chemistry. So I was looking for an area that would inspire me to continue my research. And I did a master's in food science at the University of Reading in England. And then I went back to Sri Lanka, served for a research institute like equivalent to CSIRO, and then I wanted to study again. And then I went to the University of British Columbia in Canada, and I did my PhD in protein chemistry, and then went back home to work. And what really defined my moment of I really want to work in this food security, nutrition security area was when I translated the science to community. So we were everything that we do is underpinned by science and we need to have evidence, but taking that and translating it to a fisher community, which is what I did in Sri Lanka, really showed me the power of science. And these were women fisher folk. And that also told me how important really forming these enterprises were and how independent these women were, economically. And then when they became economically independent, I saw them sending their children to school. And so I saw this community growing. And then very inspired by that, even the science is exciting, but the translation the impact was really rewarding. And then because of the war, I moved to Australia, and I was going to miss this component of community engagement. Fortunate enough to get into the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries in Queensland, and then I got an opportunity to work with Indigenous communities, and then I realized a similar situation of a lot of plant resources, but really not understanding the science behind it, even though there was a lot of traditional knowledge. So the connection between traditional knowledge and the Western science was very powerful in getting these products into market. And that's where a lot of the research ideas started coming through. And that's when I got into that in research in DAF. And then I went to the university in 2010, and that's how I ended up becoming an academic in Australia. So I'll let Risty do the rest.
Okay, so let me introduce Risty. Dr. Risty Permani, passionate about promoting food security, has led multiple international research and development projects and capacity building programs to support the food and agriculture sectoral development, ranging from international trade, global value change, and digital transformation in agriculture to policy evaluation. Has also served as an expert reviewer to assess multiple international development projects related to food security in recognition of her expertise in project management, the monitoring and evaluation framework, and impact pathway. And Risty is currently a senior lecturer in agribusiness, the Bachelor of Agribusiness Program Coordinator, and the chair of the Engagement and Advancement Committee at the School of Agriculture and Food Sustainability at the Uni of Queensland. And over a career of 10 years, or 10 years in academics in Australia, Risty's understanding of cross-border research and policy engagement excelled during her time as Assistant Director at the Association of Southeast Asian Nations Integration Monitoring Directorate at the ASEAN Secretariat. I think there's an awful lot of names in there that are very long and complicated, and I'm very impressed. Over to you, Risty.
Thanks very much, Chris, for the kind introduction, and thank you for coming, everyone. And also, I just want to say hi to those on Zoom. Yeah, I think, Chris, you've kind of summarized very well about my journey. I did my undergrad in statistics and at an agriculture university, but that was not my first love, agriculture. I kind of couldn't relate to what agriculture was about, so I was just into math. But then I did my master's and PhD in economics. Then I got the opportunity to do postdoc, and that was funded by the Australian Centre for International Agriculture Research. So probably a couple of colleagues here are familiar with them, ACR, as we call. And that was on agriculture trade, and I studied in 2010, my postdoc in 2010. And you probably remember 2011, Australian government decided to ban live cattle export to Indonesia. And I think that's just the starting of how I just get stuck in agriculture. It was very topical at that time, and I was interested in agriculture trade at that time. As you know, like more than 70% of agriculture produce is being exported. So, but then because of that export ban, I got to understand a bit more about the policy complexity and the bilateral relationship. So we talked with a couple of colleagues here, Megan and Helen, that that relationship with the other countries, it becomes really important. And I think that's 2010. After I finished my PhD, that's when I started realizing that I'm very interested in international development. And then I moved from School of Economics to a center called the Center for Global Food and Resources at Adelaide University. And one of the reasons why I moved, because as you probably know, economics, people in economics tend to use, secondary data, big data. but that center that provided me with opportunity to do like more field work, engaging with farmers, and which then I realized I learned so much more from just talking to farmers. Yasmina is my mentor, just to make a disclaimer. So I learned a lot from Yasmina, and yeah, we just finished this 2-week Women in STEM Mongolia short course. So with participants from Mongolia, we spent last week in Canberra. And I think this international development is increasingly is also become capacity building. And I think that's how I become even more interested in international development, because I'm passionate also about teaching. So and I put a bit of word about the impact pathway in my bio, because I think that's the kind of language and expectation that a lot of funding agencies now have, especially the Australian government, which I personally believe that that's the way we should do. Like when we want to invest in whether that's capacity building, research, commercialization pathways, we need to know what's the impact that we expect to get from our investment. And I mean, as much as we want to say that, well, this is about, supporting either partner countries or communities and overseas, I think it remains important that we as a researcher or those involved in international development have that some clarity about what we're planning to do and the impact that we try to get. Yeah, I'll probably stop there. It's a conversation. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll ask a few questions, but this is for everyone to ask questions. And for those of you who are online, Jess, WiAD and Kodra, please feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we will then ask those questions for you, so that you also have an opportunity. But you can also feel free to take the mute off and put your hand up, and then we'll see, and we'll come over to you. You can actually ask your question directly. So, starting with you, I'm interested in the course that you've just both been doing in Canberra. Canberra? Yes, the Women in STEM Mongolia short course. That I'm assuming is to expand knowledge. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that seems to be one of the critical things to help disseminate information.
So Women in STEM Mongolia was a leadership course. So we had 20 women coming from different science backgrounds. So we had neurosurgeons, we had pediatricians, we had mathematicians, astrophysicists, microbiologists, a room full of absolutely brilliant, high-achieving women who really wanted to learn about leadership. And the diversity in the subjects also were very helpful, because the conversations were different and it was a learning from each other. And so we first did a leadership in practice, training them in that, because the language we started using was strategic management, governance, and all these partnerships and collaborations and all that. So we thought a leadership in practice would be really good. And they just wanted that information, isn't it, Christy? It was something that they were really needing. And then it was a 2-week course, so we divided it into, we were in the Gold Coast, they had never seen the sea.
Oh.
It's landlocked. It's landlocked. So it was, we told them, bring your swimsuits, and they, yeah, you will bring your swimsuits, and then they had never seen the sea. So it was, they really enjoyed that. And then we were in Brisbane, and then we went to Canberra to meet ACA, all these, the CSIRO, all having amazing gender equality programs, and the SAGE CEO, all of them came and spoke. And it was forming like a community of practice, isn't it, Christy, even within ourselves. And it showed me how much Australia can help our neighboring countries. I feel we don't do enough. And there's a big role that Australia campaign, not only in the Pacific, but around, Mongolia and Vietnam and all these countries. What do you think, Kirsty?
Yeah, so it's funded by Australia Awards, South Asia and Mongolia. So University of Queensland, we have a special unit called the UQID, International Development, that's got experience in running this type of short course, including, for participants from Indonesia and so on. So yeah, when we developed the program, I still remember we developed that impact pathway, what's actually we want to achieve, and we purposefully put to achieve a more equitable and inclusive STEM community, full stop. We don't put Mongolia there because we think that, well, this is not about Australia teaching Mongolia. This is about us, there's a bit of reflection, and which we did, right? We didn't realize that there's so much that we can learn from them, and we found that in terms of statistics, proportion of women in STEM, Mongolia is actually #1 in the world. Like the ILO stat, like everyone was surprised, including colleagues from Mongolia. So, but of course, it doesn't mean that there's no issue about gender equality there, because as Yasmina mentioned, the leadership is the issue there. But we still face that, and despite all these action plans, frameworks that a number of different organizations have, including CSIRO and DFAT has this the JETSI guidebook and all. We know it just when we look at the statistics that we still have a lot of work, and so this kind of short course provides an opportunity to network with so many different pockets in Australia, like this women in STEM with double M, because medicine is also included, community artifactors, there's even this one, the women in aid and development. So I think we sort of like share the same vision of, promoting that gender equality. So, which again, if we take a bigger perspective in terms of international development, again, I think when I just started my postdoc, I still remember Australian government used the term aid for trade a lot, which I was not a big fan because I feel like it's very transactional, like you give aid so that we can send more exports to other countries. But this is about partnership. So even though we call it capacity building or now, and I think the wording around DFAT now they want to change the term, like when we went to Asia, from capacity building to
Engagement.
Partnerships, either partnership or engagement. So it's a more like a level playing field, like equal partners instead of, we are sort of teaching our partner countries.
And we had some amazing male champions.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, which was really good, because in Mongolia, they were saying that all the higher positions are held by men, and the women do a lot of the work, but they're quite invisible. And that is what they were really interested in. How do you overcome that? And then you need to have buy-in from male colleagues and make sure that they understand the work that we're doing. So we had some good male champions who came and spoke to the women, which really helped. And also what was interesting was when the CEO of SAGE, Yanni, addressed the group, this bias that we have, like I must know my biases even when I'm in interview panels. I am biased to take females, right? I must understand that. But then also, if you're working in a group and your organization is like 90% women, and you have an interview and the male and the female candidate are equal, then which one do you take to your organization? To be inclusive, it should be the male candidate, right? So you need to reflect back and think of the situation and your own biases. Because if not, it shouldn't be us and them, right? Joel, you're our male champion in this room now.
And also,
Which is great.
Yeah,
This gender is not just seen as
it was not, which was a light bulb moment for me, because I have a bias like that, and then I realized that, you need to reflect yourself about your own biases when it comes to this.
That's fascinating. And so the male champions you had, were they from Australia or were they from Mongolia?
From Australia.
Australia. Mhm. Yeah, and certainly I think for a lot of people who work in the sector, I mean, one of the things that we hear again and again is the importance of getting that male buy-in.
Yes.
Did you get any suggestions or ideas that would help with that for those women when they go back to Mongolia? And obviously would help women in all aspects of the sector as well.
Yes, one thing that they were really interested in was conflict management and influence. How do you influence at a meeting? And so we had a bit of role playing and giving a lot of examples of, we even had an entire play being acted, right? Farmers and policymakers and government. So the course was designed in such a way, I learned a lot from you, Risti. It was lecture, practice. We just, in the sciences, we lecture a lot. We don't have a lot of practice, but it was nice to see the practice and role playing, because then they put themselves into that real situation and they have to act it out. And so some of them became very passionate in their roles, isn't it? The farmer was really like the farmer, very anxious that their land was taken and, very, did her part very well. But that taught them how to manage these situations. And we were also talking about, if you're in a room and you have one person, the ideas are not great, but they are the ones who are really dominating that conversation. So we said, how do you manage that? Is by saying that, oh yeah, that idea is very interesting that you're talking about, but this is another idea I would like to present, and then give your idea without saying, oh, you're talking rubbish or hurting that person, So they were understanding some of the leadership skills in that, and really taking those messages home, because we had the neurosurgeon, right? She said that one of her male colleagues didn't do something right on the operating theatre, and she she asked him to leave, and she was, I shouldn't have managed that. That was not the proper way of managing that. So they were going back to the way they do, their work life. So it was good.
Yeah, very interesting. So in terms of the work that you're doing, and Risti, you're doing some quite practical work with people, are most of the people that you find in the field, in the projects you go to, are they female or male? And who makes the decisions there?
Good question, Chris. When I co-develop a project with our partner or collaborators in country institutions, we always try to make sure that we speak to both men and women. Otherwise, we wouldn't get a complete picture of what's happening. Having said that, I do a lot of policy analysis, and when we try to arrange interviews or meetings, most of the time it would be males who turn up, or who will have the authority to speak to researchers. And we try to minimize that situation by stating, for example, in the invitation, or we encourage the participation of female researchers, and sometimes you also quote like early career researchers or early career official or something like that. That's from the policy work. But when we go to the field with farmers, and now there's even a stronger push from the Australian government that we have to incorporate what is called SGEC, the Gender Equality, Disability and Social Inclusion. Now, if we just look at the gender, for example, and I think Farah can, she's also an expert in this area, that ideally, subject to budget constraint, we should speak to both male and females of the household. I mentioned that I learned a lot from farmers. So the first, I guess, gender equality lesson that I've ever got was when I talked to a female farmer. I was doing a dairy project in Indonesia, and I talked to her. It was still like we're sort of still testing the questionnaire and things like that. So it was very informal conversation, and I was like, oh, so you're helping, your husband to take care of the animal barn or doing any farming activities, and she said, no, I don't do anything, like I don't contribute to anything. So it's not until we sort of break down different activities, she's actually doing a lot of things. So she's coming to the cooperative meetings, she's helping cleaning the well, it's a real thing that cows are being placed in the kitchen in Indonesia. So when I say like animal barn, that we can also be a kitchen at the same time. So she's taking care of that and cleaning the milking equipment, if necessary, helping like cutting the grass and all these things. So that's an issue. Like if you just ask the husband, he might just say, oh, she's just staying at home or something like that. But so that gives us quite a big lesson, like how we can structure the questionnaire so we can, capture all that information. Not to mention that if the question is asked by male and female, we would get, there's always different answers. And the language that we use. So like I'm Indonesian, I can speak Indonesian language, but when we go to the village, they speak like a different, local language. So yeah, there's like multi-layer. So it's not just gender, there's I guess social inclusion, like how to speak to the slow socioeconomic and all those things. So yeah, speak to both.
Yes. Quite fascinating. Do you have any to add to that? Yes, me. That's sort of in the talking to people in overseas.
So
Or
Sri Lanka has a little bit of a different situation because the communities that I work with, we also have this. Sri Lanka sends a lot of. We have a lot of housemaid, people who go to foreign countries to work.
Yeah.
So we also have families where the father is the one who is looking after the children, but the household, the mother has gone overseas. And sometimes that can work well. Sometimes it can go really pear-shaped where the father takes the money and there's a lot of drinking that happens and the children are not. So one goal of the project was actually to empower women so that they don't have to go overseas, so that they can be at home and look after the families and really give them the training and the capacity to run businesses. And once they got that, it was amazing the way they managed the household, the way they, managed the economy and send the children to school and all that. So that is becoming a social problem, and we were also addressing it from the angle of really giving them the skills to develop their own enterprise. And these were not young women. I had a lady who was about 65 years. So her daughter had gone abroad to work and she had all these grandchildren and she learned, and I was teaching them fish processing. So, to hygienically process fish and everything. And then she would do that in her village and she would bring it to the city where we worked. And I think once a month, she would come to sell off because the product was so good. Everybody in the workplace was waiting for her to come to buy her products. And she was like 65, she was fairly old. But then I thought, this is the power of empowerment. They will find their own pathways on how to build and have market access. And then you found she would take profits back to her family. So training and capacity building is very important.
Absolutely. And does that then lead on to the other area of your research in terms of nutrition and bringing better nutrition into families?
Yes.
So one leads into another.
Yeah. So I was just thinking, I was telling this to the people in the room and who are not from an agriculture food background. So food security is like food being affordable and accessible to everyone. I also like the word food justice. Food justice means it's it's a right for every human being to have food. And we have to make sure that the systems work, that we guarantee that these people have food. And food nutrition security is you need to have consistent access to healthy food. Now, Australia, a lot of the developing countries, of course, have food insecurity, but they also have nutritional insecurity because they don't have access to a lot of the fruits and vegetables. But countries like Australia are also not immune to food insecurity because we have about 3.3 million people who in the last 12 months did not have access to food. So if you look at the world scenario, we have about 9 crops that gives you 66% of your needs of the food energy. You have about 6,000 plant species that are grown, but what gets onto your plate is very few vegetables. So that's what you mean by hidden hunger, that even though you have a plate of rice or bread, you don't have the vegetables and the protein sometimes to really complement that whole meal situation. And our push is, especially if you take a country like Australia, there's a huge population that has migrated from different countries, and they would be familiar with their own vegetables and fruits. So we should really promote all these to be in the dietary guidelines. It's not only, I mean, carrots, celery, all those are good, fantastic vegetables, but there's a lot of other things like eggplants and lady's fingers and a lot of the green leafy vegetables that we eat that are really not represented. Now, if you can get all that into your plate, you get your iron, your zinc, and a lot of the micronutrients that you will not get by only eating the rice and maybe maize and bread and things like that. And Australia is a land that is blessed with 28,000 plant species that also don't get onto our plates. So all the indigenous foods and the native foods that we have are also not on our plates. So there's a lot of work to do, and indigenous populations really have all that knowledge of, like when COVID came and we were not allowed to go into communities because we would take the virus or, but the communities were fine. Whereas our supermarkets were quite empty. Communities had enough of food because they knew what to eat. And this was not only in Australia, like we had students from Zambia, and I would ask them, how is the situation there? And they said, oh, our communities are fine. They're now going and finding boab and all that. They know what to find in the wild, which we would be helpless because we don't know what to go and eat from the wild even. But I want that local food systems and solutions to be also available to everybody and to be inclusive even in urban cities. So we can easily have protected cropping systems or, where you can grow things in your garden as long as we train and capacity build people. I mean, how wonderful it would be for you to go and harvest your own tomato and, whatever vegetables that you like. It doesn't take a lot to teach people. And to me, local food solutions is another way of looking at nutrition security, as long as you understand that that is important. Also, we don't work in multidisciplinary teams. So the medical doctors are in one area, maybe they're not taught nutrition at all in their medical degree. And then you get nutritionists and dietitians in one area, and then you get the food scientists in another. All these professions should be working together and really emphasizing the importance of diet diversity and how you can easily get a healthy meal plan onto your plate. And when you're designing these meals, also really, again, training and capacity building, very simple messages, and people can have a healthy diet.
And you also look at post-harvest losses through value addition. So how do you do that? What are the sort of things that you can help people to learn?
Yeah, so anything that's post-farm gate, so whatever you grow out on the field is production, and then we do the post-harvest. And from the moment the fruit is harvested or the vegetable is harvested, you will get nutritional losses unless you look after it. It's same for fish or meat or anything. So you must know whether, if it's a high vitamin C food, you need to know, whether it's cold storage that will retain those nutrients, and you must manage the post-harvest losses. So at the moment, even though we produce so much, in developing countries, you might lose about 30 to 40% post-farm gate because they don't have the facilities to store it and to look after it. In developed countries, you get a lot of losses from the consumer because you take it home and you put it in your fridge and then it goes bad and you're throwing it. So there's another kind of food loss that happens. But all this is affecting the environment, you know, because to grow this is so much of carbon emissions and all these things that we take into consideration. So our idea is if it's perishable, try to make it stable as fast as possible and try to dry it or add value in a way that you stabilize the loss. And drying is a very safe way of canning is very good. You know, it's a very nice way of keeping products for a long time, and especially if you do like the beans and things like that, you can can and still a very healthy product. And we are also trying to remove all the chemicals, like the chemical additives. So some of the chemical antioxidants have now been removed from a lot of the European standards. So we are trying to remove the synthetic chemicals and adding the natural, you know, the alternatives like plant extract. So we did a project with a community in Darwin where the company that was working with us really wanted us to remove all the chemical additives to meals that are going into communities. And we removed all the synthetic antioxidants and we replaced it with what is known as cacaduplum, which is a very potent antioxidant and an antimicrobial. And we extended the shelf life of the meal. And this company was very particular that we do not have any additives added to these meals. So it can be done. It's just that we need to understand how and what are the plants or what or natural alternatives that we can do so that we really, and also it adds to that sustainability statement because you're not adding any synthetic chemicals, you're adding something that's natural that can be used as a food and it is also beneficial to your health.
Very interesting. Yeah. Is there, I don't know if this is your area, but is there, do you also work on the loss of production here because the vegetables are ugly? That's a big focus. I know now in what I read where people require perfect oranges and perfect apples and farmers have to lose a lot of their production because it's not pretty enough, the big two supermarkets.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, that is a bit sad, isn't it? I don't know whether anybody here really wants a perfect carrot.
That's developed country.
Yes.
I'm just wondering whether is it the consumer, is it something that the supermarket also finds very convenient to ask?
Mm.
We don't know.
Very,
Yes.
very good question.
So to me, whatever doesn't go into the supermarket, then you should have in a farmer's market where people can have access to it.
Mhm.
Where people can go and buy, or you value add. And you can dehydrate it, or you can can it, or you can, you know, do a lot of other things with it. But just make sure that you stabilize it so that you don't lose it.
You don't lose it.
Yeah.
That's the critical thing.
Yes.
Mhm. Can I open it up to others to ask questions? Because here. Let me have a little look. Are there any questions there at the moment from our online friends? Do feel free to give us a question or two here. Did they see we couldn't hear?
We can hear.
Can, okay, yeah. No, I can't see it. I can't
It's
see
a
it.
bit too late.
I know,
You can't,
I know, right?
you can't hear. It's like almost done and you can't hear.
Okay,
I'm gonna jump in question if possible. Yes, thank you very much for sharing about, your backgrounds and experiences, really interesting. I had a question, I guess, and please excuse my ignorance, not from an agricultural background, so, I think from the very sort of small exposure I've seen international development projects in Australia, funding for agriculture, lots of it has been around using agriculture for economic empowerment, economic betterment, economic prosperity. And you sometimes see that, one way to do that is trying to connect, producers, connect them to markets, improve their access to markets to sell their products. And I guess I'm interested, Yasmina, with your research around nutrient deficiency and, this sort of quite narrow dietary consumption that happens now. When we're in helping boost small scale producers access to markets, we kind of look at producing where the demand is, you know? How do you sort of break that cycle of connecting people to markets so they produce what has demand? So then we just keep producing the things that will be sold. Where, at what point in the cycle can, I guess from a development perspective and programs, where can we sort of look to break that to ensure that we can get diversity in food production into that flow?
That's an excellent question. So I think in places like Africa, I think maize has been an introduced crop to Africa, and people eat a lot of maize, and they have maize on their plate, but maize only has the carbohydrate kind of. So getting these other foods, as you were saying, onto the plate, how they have gone about doing that is really working. I'll give you an example of a project that's done in Limpopo in South Africa by one of my colleagues. So they have got together with the farmers in Limpopo, and they know what are the vegetables that they like to eat. So they have a lot of green leafy vegetables, which these people have done all the nutritional analysis, and they find that it is high in iron and zinc and all the micronutrients. A lot of the we call it phytochemicals, they're type of compounds that are important for your health. So they're not nutritionally like, like the vitamins, but they are important for your health, and they can have anti-inflammatory properties, anti-diabetic properties, a lot of the health properties. So they have selected these vegetables that can go onto the plate, and now nutritionists are coming along and promoting that as, even as an anti-diabetic food. So when they go into churches, like one of my colleagues, when she goes to her village, her father always, very proud of the daughter who is a professor and everything. And the first thing they want to know is what is the food that will help with my diabetes? So you need to have scientific evidence to say that these do have anti-diabetic properties. But in that way, through the church, they can really send that message out to say that these are the vegetables that are good for you. And then you create that kind of need, and then they start growing it. So I feel now the green leafy vegetable market is really growing in these countries because of that kind of promotion and the community activity, and now it goes into the supermarket. So they have got solar dryers now, and they're drying the green leafy vegetables and grinding it, and then they're putting it in packets, in sachets, into soups, into like beverages. And recently I heard even Murunga is going to the EU market, because they have such a good, Murunga has been studied by all countries. So Murunga has a lot of health benefits, and they're growing Murunga, doing the drying in a solar dryer, and they're sending it. And also sustainability wise, they're not using any energy other than solar energy. So that's a nice story to tell as well. So I think you need to only way you can break the cycle to me is when you underpin, I'm very biased, underpin everything with science. But Rishi, you can comment on the economics. Rishi always is, unless you give them the economic benefit, the market will not move, which I think people understand economics, right? Which I very reluctantly agree now.
Yeah. Well, if I'm wearing my an economist hat, it's about understanding incentives, right? And I think if we look at the supply chain movement, that's shifting from that supply driven into consumer driven. So I think whether we like it or not, that's happening. But then I guess the question is, how can then we support this, for example, underutilized crops and, improve the local crops and food? From the economics point of view, if there is not enough investment by the private sector, then that means there's a room for the public investment. And I think this is how, like, for example, the Australian government international development funding can support. And I mentioned like ACR before, the Australian Centre for International Agriculture Research. I would say most of the projects that they've done are around supporting smallholder farmers in partner countries to get access to markets. Because as we know, like for smallholders to figure out, oh, this local crop is good for me, and finding the consumers and everything, that's very costly, not just in terms of money, but the learning cost, and even just to get the scientific information from the researchers, there's still a gap. So international development funding can sort of like facilitate, this activity, and it can be very time consuming, from like conceptualization to commercialization. But if it's profitable, there's a better chance that it's going to be a more sustainable solution. Because at the end of the day, the government can't just, despite the scientific evidence, they can't just here's the seeds, you figure out how to plant this and how to market that. That's not going to work. So Yasmina mentioned about the multidisciplinary. I think that's the importance of it, and we need to understand the farmers' behaviors. Like the social science colleagues can also contribute to that process, not just we're from economics, can't solve a lot of things, so we admit that, and science obviously is a critical part of that too.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, or did we go round and round?
No, I think it comes back to your point, both of you touched on it now, about the so many different ways that and sectors that influence agriculture and food consumption, and how that plays into the role of a nation and their economy. So it can't come from a specific angle. So yeah, I think you guys gave a really well-rounded answer. Thank you very much.
Another question? Yep.
I've got another question. Okay. So a lot of food systems in countries now are disrupted, like not just because of Ukraine and Russia, but Myanmar, Afghanistan, like Somalia. There's so many conflicts. And how do systems, and forgive me because I've also got from an agricultural background, but those market systems, how do they respond when there's so much disruption? Like how do we create or invest in systems that can be responsive or adapt to those kind of situations? Because those systems, I guess they rely on a really steady, predictable context. And more we're not seeing that in developing countries. We're seeing very complex operating situations like in Myanmar. So I don't know, have you seen them adapt well? Like what kind of things, when you do need evidence and you do need to build up the systems and have all that collaboration, what does it look like? Have you seen any examples that have worked well in adapting to when there's disruption from even disasters, natural disasters? Sorry, that's a really hard question, but
You want to go? So the hard one is for risk.
So I do some research on the impact of natural disasters on global value chains, but I think that can to some extent be applicable to your question. So I would say the work that we do, like in terms of commercialization, all this supporting smallholder farmers, that's for like the normal times, right? But we do need some emergency measures, and solutions to that is, there are multiple ways to help the communities to, improve the resilience of the food systems. Yasmina and I and a couple of colleagues at the University of Queensland currently doing Australian government bilateral funding on peri-urban food system resilience, for example. So we understand, the climate change, the market shocks and all that, and how that affect the resilience. But like, for example, with the disasters, a lot of the solutions require multilateral cooperation. So one of my papers was looking at the role of trade agreements in facilitating the emergency response during the natural disasters. Because what we learned from COVID and also during the disasters is that a lot of countries don't have clear mechanism how they would allow the relief goods to get into the country, including food and medical supplies and all those things. So they kind of is more like responsive rather than like a more proactive. So that's been discussed at like multi-layers from the World Trade Organization, although they couldn't reach a conclusion on that is, well, they always get stuck anyway. But yeah, like even within ASEAN, for example, in Southeast Asia, that's been discussed. So I guess, I guess the solution is not just coming from the agriculture, in itself from also other parts, including international cooperation.
Also, I think food systems are globalized. So you have very big multinational companies like, the Nestle's and the Levers, who really have almost like a monopoly in this area, who really command a lot of these, prices and the way things are operating. And that in itself is a bit dangerous, because if supply chains are disrupted, then because we have these central hubs of production, right? They all get affected and then the whole thing is disrupted. So I think how you can build resilience into the market is, we're going to have climate change, right? So if you look at Western Australia, a lot of their land is becoming saline. So they can't grow like wheat and everything that is growing, they're losing those lands. So you need to understand what are the other crops that we can bring in. So things like helophytes, like samphire, saltbush, and all are really resilient crops that can come into those, to grow on those soils. And then I think globally there must be an understanding of, if your country is going into this kind of climate, what are the best plants that will grow there? And if Australia is going to another type of climate, what are the best plants that? So there should be kind of a global exchange of seeds, and this knowledge sharing should be very, very generous, because we have to look after each other, because a lot of countries, the climate is changing, and that will also disrupt our supply. So if you get that climate change, then the wars, then the pests and all these diseases, and then you get also the other wars that are happening, that the World Food Program and all have to get involved because they need to give aid. So you need to have a system where you stabilize your food, and that should be available to send, to these disaster zones. Are we prepared after COVID-19? Did we learn anything? That's my worry. If another COVID-19 happens, we'll be fighting for toilet paper and doing all that dance that we did before? Or have we learned where we have now? I don't think we're thinking like that. We're thinking COVID came and COVID is gone, but another thing is going to come. We are not ready. So to me, I'm very passionate about local food systems. If you can grow yams, things that can really grow in this soil, it's very easy to grow. And if you can eat the leaves of the yam, there's no waste at all. If you have those systems, then even though the global systems are getting affected, you still have food to eat. And that is, for me, the most important thing. If you can train people to grow something in there, I know economically it is not like we are not having these huge food supply chains, and but we do have systems that are resilient, that will look after its own population.
But some countries also have constraints in terms of their agroclimatic and that size. Like I was thinking of Singapore, for example. Although now they're investing a lot in agriculture, like producing their own food despite the limited land size that they have. So I guess my worry, one of the lessons after the COVID is that countries increasingly become more inward looking. I mean, yes, local food solution is really needed, but I think ideally, we like globally, we have to sort of compile all
Yes,
this local
yes.
food knowledge,
Yes,
right,
yes.
and share with each other. But
Mm.
I guess the question is whether that's happening or not, right?
Yes.
That's the challenge.
So these underutilized crops are called orphan crops and all that. Who is going to fund that? The private sector is not going to come and fund that because they don't see any value in, can you grow it in acres and acres of land, it's small scale, so it has to be some kind of, as you said, the government, public funding should happen there. And then these businesses can start growing to larger supply chains, but initially somebody has to invest that money. I don't know whether we answered that. That's a very difficult question.
It's $1 million or even more.
Yeah, but every time there's a famine, I'm always thinking, why? There's no food, why?
I have
Sorry.
a question and I almost went first, and now I'm so glad I didn't. Thank you so much, ladies. My question is a little bit more domestically focused. So you've mentioned Western Australia is having to transform some of the crops that they're using, but also that generally in Australia, we're not very diverse
Yes.
in the foods that we eat. And we also have trade relationships that depend on both import and export. We also know Australia's climate is changing. What sort of things are happening already in Queensland or in Australia to do some of that adaptation work socially and agriculturally?
So we have some, so we're working with Western Australia, trying to see how we can work with those plants, because you also know that agricultural land also, we have this biofuel kind of other resources that are going in for biofuel. So we should treasure the agricultural land. They can't use that, but some of these lands that you can't grow a lot of the agricultural crops can be used for that. So we are looking at, water is going to be a big problem. So we are looking at lands that don't have enough of water, and then trying to see what plants will grow on those lands, and then getting a lot of scientists from different areas to work on that particular problem and see what we can grow there. And then also what is the value addition that can happen. So arid land crops are like wattle seeds, have you heard? Acacia species. So it grows, it's a perennial crop, it's a legume, it's very nutrient dense. It has a lot of proteins, high fiber. It's ideal for you to really make a healthy meal, and you can incorporate that into your major grains, you can put that into wheat, you can put that into maize, you can really make. So we are selecting those crops. So we are studying a range of crops that actually has traditional knowledge connected to it, people who really have lived on those lands and they know what grows. So we are looking at those crops and also looking at the crops that would grow on those lands. So for example, especially in areas where mining is happening and you get regional, you need to replant those. We're trying to understand what are the food crops that really grew on those lands, and can we plant those crops and then use those crops as food. So for example, in Nananba in the Northern Territory, there is something known as a green plum, which is absolutely delicious. And it's full of folates, and folates is very important for us, you need to take folic acid when you're pregnant, but the synthetic folic acid is not really absorbed by your body, but we have folic acid that's present in the green plant that's highly absorbable to our systems. Now, there's a lot of this plum in that region, so can we get that? The communities eat that, but can we also have it as a food that can be accessible to the wider community in terms of, as a powder or as a dehydrated powder where you can put that into your food. And these grow also in lands that are, quite arid and in the wild. So we are identifying some of these plants, but really looking at the regions, like in Alice Springs. There are certain plants that will only grow in those arid conditions, and we are trying to see how we can grow that. And then we are also collaborating with our international partners because some of their lands will become like Alice Springs. So they are wanting to know what is growing in Alice Springs so that in the future we can grow some of those plants on our land. So as Risky said, this collective international effort is very important because if we don't look after each other, it's going to be a huge problem for all countries. Because I was in Denmark last 2 weeks and some of the land is waterlogged. So now the crops that usually grow there wouldn't grow, so they need to do intercropping now, which is something that they haven't faced before. So every country is having its own challenges. Can we grow rice the way we grew it before with so much of water? We don't have enough of water, and some of these countries that are growing rice cannot grow the rice because there is not enough of water. So now research is being done into can we grow rice without water? So there's a lot of native rice species that are being studied. So there's a lot of work that is going on to understand the climate and what type of crops can be grown, and then also looking at it from a nutrient angle. You need to look at it nutritionally because you need to see that whatever we put on the table is something. And if you have a nutrient dense crop, then you don't have to grow a lot of it because you will need less of it.
Maybe part of it is us in our homes becoming more experimental with the things that
Yes.
we're not used to. And
Yes.
but also
Yeah, I guess if I take like a helicopter view of what's happening in Australia, a couple of things, although probably we see that this is as sort of like domestic issues, but related to what's happening globally, I would probably highlight 3. Number 1, carbon neutral agriculture. And one of my colleagues here, Iqbal, is working on carbon neutral agriculture in Indonesia. But as we know, like for example, the livestock sector, they want to be carbon neutral by 2030. And I can see that the different industry bodies like Court Innovation are also moving towards that, or because probably they have less pressure compared to the livestock sector. The second thing is traceability, and Yasmin also been doing a lot of work. I've been doing some work on the traceability in the beef sector, so connecting between Australia and Indonesia's supply chain, for example. And that's important for our global market, but that work has to start from our own farm, right? Because we want to maintain that Australian reputation overseas, and especially in market like China. And the next thing I think is AgTech also has received a lot of funding, and I guess to some extent because of the labor shortage that we have, so it's not just for the like commercial big farms, but also the small businesses that we see in Southeast Queensland. They increasingly put more investment in the AgTech space. And Yasmin, I mentioned about water security. That's also, I think, continue to be a concern for us. And from the education sector's perspective, like our students, I'm teaching bachelor of business students, for example. We engage a lot with the industry partners, and these topics are some of the topics that our industry, agriculture industry, are interested in. Especially the carbon neutral agriculture. That's something that a lot of big companies and they worry about all this greenwashing and how to demonstrate their commitment to sustainability because of the market access reason, or just building their the identity in the market. So probably some of those things that we can think of.
Very interesting. Thank you. So I have this question. There has been like growing discussion about the feminization in responsibility, which means that when development programs make their programs to, like, for example, women farmers, they are kind of like these women have like another responsibility to attend the trainings as well. So they have to juggle a bit with their like domestic responsibilities, maybe working in a farm and also attending to the trainings. From your experiences, like collaborating with donors, international agencies, and maybe doing community engagement, what is sort of like the
to what extent donor have like I mean, to what extent a donor concerned with this feminization of responsibility, and how they like what they want to translate this into the programs.
In Indonesia or in any countries in particular?
Getting your experience.
Okay. Okay, if my understanding from the donor's perspective, they want us to get that, complete picture of how the gender dynamics, the power dynamics, and not only in terms of how we engage with like our respondents or stakeholders, but also how we run and manage the project. So I guess what the donor wants to see is that we empower women, that's number one, and we also build the capacity of our collaborators in the partner countries in that process. So it's not just about the research itself, but how we partner and collaborate with the partner countries. Now, what's the best way to engage with women? I think after COVID, I would say there's a bit of shift. Like now we've got these digital platforms that we can probably utilize a bit more. We are hoping that we get the new funding to sort of trial a couple of hypotheses that we think we still need to test. Like I did agri-food e-commerce survey about 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, 2021. It's not a representative sample, but 75% of the online agri-food sellers that we interviewed were actually females. And we asked, how you get information about marketing and about how to sell your products and how to use e-commerce and so on. And the source of information really varied. So I think the conclusion that we got was that there's no really one way of communicating or engaging with these groups. But yeah, to answer your question, what's effective now, we probably need to test that this year, because I've got a feeling that this thing changing, whether in person is more effective or online platform or sort of both. Even like I think you're addressing the role of extension officers, for example, whether that's still relevant in terms of communicating that. So yeah, I'm sorry, I can't really give like exact answer, because I think there's no really, one size that fits all sort of thing, and probably, as like the different communities. So I think that's just highlighting the importance of understanding the community groups and talk to them, like before we then conceptualize that, okay, this is the form of training, which government programs don't always go through that process, right? Understanding what's the most suitable way of engaging the women, for example.
I had just one more, if I may. Christy, you look at cross-border research, and I was wondering what is the balance in terms of overseas research and Australian research, because that's where we sit now.
Mm-hmm.
And is there more influence of one or the other in the countries that you are operating in? So, for example, in Indonesia, is Indonesian research more influential than Australian or German or American? I mean, we all do research, don't we? So I was just wondering about how, whether you can see a difference in take-up of some information because of its source.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I would say I never really compare like the quality or like the uptake between if the message is coming from like Indonesian researchers' work, and what I found is that Australian researchers, including myself, we can't do any work in partner countries without collaborating with them.
Yeah.
We're not that special. We need their local knowledge. And I guess maybe I would say, I don't know, maybe people working in this international development space 20 years ago, maybe that supremacy of Australia was there. But now it's becoming more and more equal partnership, I would say. We learn a lot. And, you know, we mentioned when we talked to these women from the Mongolia, we learned a lot from them. And we realized we've got so many challenges that we and in that process, I think, yeah, it's just about acceptance, I would say. But I do want to say though, a lot of, I guess, research direction is highly guided by the funding availability. So I think this is the area where the Australian government, if they are to continue, you know, investing in this international development, have to be really strategic. Our partner countries know that there's no free lunch. Must be an agenda, but so far I think I've been very lucky to be part of the research groups that still genuinely want to network and make impact in those partner countries. But what I'm trying to also say that well, so far Australia has been really strategic in terms of choosing what should be the focus of the investment in R&D, the research and development. For example, the Connect Seed grant that we just applied earlier this year, they're looking at digital transformation in Indonesia, in agriculture, in agri-food sector, which is a big thing in Indonesia at the moment. So in my opinion, that's a good, you know, focus topic. But I think topic is one thing, strategy is another thing. As in my opinion, Australian government now increasingly has more and more schemes, and we tend to invest in smaller projects and shorter projects, which make it difficult for us as researchers to make impact. As much as we want to help these women groups to market their carrots or whatever local crops to the market, we would probably need more than 3 years to actually see that. And I think that's probably Australian government needs to think a bit further, like even with Indonesia, there's so many different schemes. They're great, they have their different focuses, but again, as researchers or people working in development space, it's just hard to make, you know, significant impact.
Thank you. And I think that that's a very different answer to what we would have had 20, 15 years ago. It is really good to hear that the collaboration that we've all been talking about for so long and the equality and the voice of local people, wherever it is actually coming through. That's fantastic. Any last questions here? Because I'm aware we need to move a little. Have we got any online questions? And if anyone online would like to ask a question in your own language, I'm sure we can do that too. Let me just come around here. Sorry, put my big head in the way, just to make sure we're not missing anything here. No, nothing at the moment. All right. No question. No questions. In which case, let me say a very big thank you to Yasmina and Risty. Fantastic, really interesting insight to your work. I have no doubt that we've actually only scratched a very small part of the surface of what you have been talking about today. This is a massive sector. And I'd encourage everyone, if you're interested in more, we record each of our sessions. So you'll be able to look at the Melbourne session, which has got Dr. Shan Huang, who works in Laos and has been working on food and nutrition. And I'm going to, branch up what it is, but food and nutrition for babies because there's been a change in the cultural practices. So they've been having lots of problems with stunting and nutritional issues with children. In Canberra, we've got a very interesting speaker whose name escapes me, I'm sorry. And Sydney, we've got another couple of speakers as well, one from Quaker Service Australia and the other from UTS. So they'll all have different angles. They'll all be up on the website before too long. But I want to say a very big thank you to both of you. Very interesting. And I do have a wonderful gift for you. It looks like this. It's about this big. It's actually a Women in Development mug. I just realised I didn't put those in my bag today. I will send them to you, and then you can proudly have them on your desk so that you can advertise Women in Development everywhere. So thank you for that. Can we say thank you in our traditional ways? Thank you. I'm going to put a couple of bits of paper on the tables. One is to ask you, what's your key takeaway from today? What is the key thing that you've learned? And the other one is to say, what topics would you like to see in the future? We would love to hear those. Our next event will be in July, August. We're actually looking at that one being a webinar, probably, bringing everyone from around Australia together. But we will be back here in October. That's our plan. And we would love you to come back and bring all your colleagues. There's also some little cards you could give people to talk about what we do. And there are also some half-price cards for those people who would also like to come along, because we'd love to be able to welcome you. I was talking earlier about this venue, which we love because it is quite a nice, friendly venue. But we are looking at another venue with one of our local organisations here so that we can meet in a boardroom, which is a bit more formal. And then I'd be able to get the actual screen working. What else can I say? We really appreciate you coming. Women in Development's been around for quite a long time now. And I know that with most of you, I was saying this earlier, we run networking sessions, workshops on governance. We have a very big mentoring program, which runs twice a year. So if you're interested in that, do apply. We have a knowledge centre on our website, which has lots of articles that come from around the world and different sectors. And it's worth dipping in there. There's sections on interviewing and CVs, there's leadership development, there's personal development. There's a whole range of things which are not always so easily accessible from within the sector. So I invite you to do that. I also invite you to stay and have another glass of soft drink or wine and finish up whatever's there that might be a bit cool, but enjoy that. Thank you for coming. And thank you again. You really appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chris, for being such a fantastic panel chair. And for the audience, for the patience in listening to us for I don't know how long.
It was only 5 minutes. Thank you. And thank you to our online. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. And we hope you've enjoyed the event too. And we'll say goodbye now. I can see you waving, Jess. Thank you. We'll say goodbye now and hope to see you also online next time. We've got a thank you from Trime. Bye-bye. Thank you. Okay. Bye.